Hello all, my name is Reggie and today I'll be sharing with you my March wrap-up. I read 8 books in the month of March, which is pretty phenomenal. So let's just get started with the first book I read in the month, which was the best book I read in the month. And that is The Hate U Give by Angie Thomas. One of those books you just have to read. It is based upon the Black Lives Matter movement and follows our main character, Star. She lives in a lower class Black community but goes to school in a mid to upper class, predominantly white community about 45 minutes away from where she lives. So a lot of the story is her balancing her two worlds. In the beginning of this book, Star goes to a party in her hometown and runs into her childhood best friend Khalil. There are gunshots at the party and they flee, and Khalil offers to give Star a ride home. On their way home, Khalil is pulled over and is forced out of the car and eventually shot, even though he is unarmed. He does pass away from this, and Star finds herself in the middle of a frenzy. She was the only witness to what happened, and she has to decide what she's gonna say, how she's gonna say it, how she's gonna use her voice, and it's a very powerful story. It's a very wonderful story. It deals with important topics, and it's basically an instant classic. I loved it so much, and I do plan on reviewing it very, very soon for you guys, but expect a review in the next few days, and I really highly recommend it. One of the best books, if not the best book I've read this year. 5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was The Heartbeats of Wing Jones by Catherine Weber. I had an e-arc of this and I absolutely adored this book to pieces. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. This is a book that follows our main character, Wing Jones, and she is kind of an outcast, just kind of doesn't know how she fits in. She just feels very uncomfortable in her own skin. While Wing doesn't have a lot of friends, she hangs around her older brother, who she absolutely adores and idolizes, his girlfriend, who she thinks is pretty much the coolest person she knows, and her brother's best friend, who she has a big crush on. During the course of the story, a huge tragedy strikes and Wing is thrust into a new world that she doesn't quite know how to handle, and she takes to running in order to kind of escape her problems. And it's beautifully constructed. It has this beautiful magical realism aspect. There's so many wonderful things about this book. I absolutely loved it, and I also plan on doing a review of this one, though it's gonna come out a little bit later, maybe next week. But this was a marvelous book. I highly recommend you get your hands on it if you're interested. It's just stunning. Next up, I read The Song Rising by Samantha Shannon, which is the 3rd book in the Bone season. Shorter than the other books, if you don't know, which was tragic, but it was incredible. I really did not expect this book to pack the punch it did. This book definitely progresses the story forward and opens up the world even more, which is insane because this is like probably the most intense and expansive world I've ever read about. So props to Samantha Shannon for doing everything she does with the series. If you don't know, this is my favorite currently ongoing series. One of my favorite books of all time is The Bone Season, which is the first book in this series, and this book really didn't disappoint. I plan on doing a review of the first 3 books in this, hopefully in the next couple of weeks. It is just beautiful and remarkable, and I love these books. They're not perfect, but they're perfect to me, which I will explain in my review. But this one did a great job with where the story went, and I just really was impressed and excited about it. So 5 out of 5 stars to this book as well. After that, I read Rana and Jamel by Pamela L. Laskin. This is a modern day retelling of Romeo and Juliet, and it is a contemporary setting because our main characters are in a Pakistani-Israeli conflict, and thus they are on the different sides of that conflict, and that's where that Capulet Montague story plot is coming from, and it's really good. Considering what it is, I think it was really well done. I don't think it's perfect, but I read some really harsh reviews on it and I think they're way too harsh. I think this is a beautiful story or retelling. It does exactly what it's supposed to. I've heard some issues with like insta love. Guys, have you ever read Romeo and Juliet? Have you ever seen it? That's the first insta love there ever was, guys. They're really taking from the source material in a lot of these aspects. I thought it was very well done. I thought it was a pretty good adaptation. I really love taking Shakespeare's works and putting them in a modern day context, especially in terms of conflicts and wars. One of my favorite productions I've ever seen of a Shakespeare play was done exactly this way, and it was just beautiful. And so I guess maybe I have a special place in my heart for this, and Romeo and Juliet is one of my favorite of Shakespeare's works. Maybe not favorite, that's probably not the right word, but it's the one I know the best, 100%. This was also written in verse, but I listened to it as an audiobook, so I definitely missed out on the aspect of it. It's also very short. I really recommend it. I think it's great. If really dislike insta love, I guess I don't recommend it, but if you can get past that because you know it's a Romeo and Juliet retelling, then I think you'll be fine, and I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Between the Worlds and Me by Tanashi Coates, and this book is just absolutely incredible. It's beautifully read, so I highly recommend the audiobook. It is very powerfully delivered, almost like a slam poem. It's just so passionate and profound, and like you can hear the heart in the words being spoken. So that's definitely how I recommend reading this book. If you don't know what this book is about, it is basically our author writing this letter to his son about the Black experience, the Black body, and that experience through time to contemporary day from his perspective, from his life, from the past, from history, but also modernly. And it's just an incredible piece of work. It's just so profound. I really was taken back by it. It's just marvelous. And I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Girl Boss by Sophia Amoruso. This book was not at all what I expected. This is essentially a memoir from the founder of Nasty Gal, which is an online boutique. I'm not really into fashion or that online boutique, but I have heard rave reviews about this book, so I decided to give it a chance. And I thought there were some really fantastic, poignant points in this book, some things that really could speak to today's youth, especially female youth, but I found a lot of it damaging. The author speaks of her mental illnesses in a very dismissive way. She speaks of her attention deficit disorder in a very offhanded way. She dismisses the use of prescriptions and other assistance to help with the mental illness. And then she also uses the term OCD in a offhanded comment that is obviously not the way OCD is meant to be used. She uses it as like an organized fashion, which is one of my biggest pet peeves in the world, is when people say, oh, you're OCD, I'm OCD, when they in fact are not diagnosed with OCD and they're saying like they're an organized person. That just really gets under my skin. But there were other things that were damaging as well. While there was some really amazing things about this book, I felt like the damaging aspects were just too much and not enough to warrant giving this book a high rating. I would not recommend a young girl read this, just because while there were some amazing points to it, the damaging aspects did not outweigh those for me, so I gave this book a 2 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Neil Patrick Harris's audiobook. This, when you read in a physical format, basically is jump around, like read to this page if you want to do this next, and read to that page if you want to do that next, and you get to jump around and very interactive. I listened to it and it's an audiobook, so it takes that interactiveness away, but I thought Neil Patrick Harris narrating the book added so much, so I feel like that was a worthwhile decision on my part. I have wanted to read this book since it first came out. I love Neil Patrick Harris. Grabbed the audiobook once, and in the beginning of that audiobook he talks about how you're kind of compromising the experience of this book by listening to the audiobook because you don't get to do that jump from chapter to chapter thing. And so I put it down and I was like, I'll read the physical copy one day. I eventually decided that I just really need to listen to the audiobook because that's just how I read memoirs, and I think it was worthwhile. If you're torn between reading the two, I definitely recommend the audiobook. I don't think it takes away from the book. In my opinion, it adds so much to the novel, especially in those parts where Neil Patrick Harris gets really passionate. Also in the points where he's talking about hosting certain events, you do kind of get some speeches or dialogue or actual moment from the events audioed in, and I think that really added to the experience as well. So really great experience reading this book. If you like Neil Patrick Harris, highly recommend it. If you just kind of are interested in him, highly recommend it. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. It was wonderful. If you're just into memoirs and audiobook memoirs and you don't really know too much about Neil Patrick Harris, still highly recommend it. This was like that good. One of the best audiobook memoirs I've read. Next up, I read Bad Feminist by Roxane Gay. This is a collection of essays. While it's titled Bad Feminist and definitely has some liberties with the way it uses the word feminism, it's definitely a super feminist book. So many people love this book. I found a lot of this book awful. I honestly was about to DNF it, give it 1-2 stars, and then the last few chapters really packed the punch. Had me nodding up and down. There was like the first chapter was really impactful, the last couple of chapters were really impactful. So much so good that I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed certain essays out of this. Honestly though, I would recommend just picking and choosing essays, skipping essays. I didn't do that, but that would have probably led to a much more enjoyable reading experience. And those are all the books I read in the month of March. Yeah, March. If you enjoyed this video, you should give it a thumbs up, and you should also comment down below and let me know what your favorite book you read in March was. My favorite was hands down The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. It was just incredible. I can't wait to review it for you guys. Subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you in my next video. Bye.